Hi, I'm Rebecca. I was serving my famous apple crisp when my 28-year-old son Trevor stood up at our family dinner and announced, "Mom, Rachel and I are moving back in next month. We've already given our landlord notice." The room went silent. My husband, David, choked on his wine. My daughter-in-law, Rachel, beamed like she'd just solved world hunger. And I set down the serving spoon and said, "Well, that's going to be impossible since I closed on selling this house yesterday." Hold up, I'm curious where you're listening from. And if this story spoke to you, make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, what I have planned for tomorrow is going to blow you away. I pulled the roast from the oven at exactly 6:30, the kitchen timer chiming over the sound of rain tapping against the windows of our Millbrook Heights home. October in Oregon meant early darkness and the kind of dampness that seeped into your bones. The dining room table was set with the good china, white porcelain with tiny blue flowers that David's mother had passed down, the kind you only use when you want dinner to feel special. Trevor had called that morning asking if they could swing by for a family meal. Something in his voice, a careful casualness, should have warned me. But I'd been so thrilled to hear from him after weeks of silence that I'd spent the afternoon making all his favorites. Pot roast with carrots, mashed potatoes from scratch, green bean casserole, and the apple crisps that had been his birthday request every year since he turned 7. David emerged from his study at 6:45, still wearing his reading glasses, newspaper folded under his arm. After 32 years of marriage, I could read his expressions like sheet music. Tonight's was puzzled concern. "You seem nervous," he said, loosening his tie. "It's just dinner with the kids." But it wasn't just dinner, was it? The careful way Trevor had phrased the invitation, Rachel's insistence on bringing something important to discuss, the fact that they'd both ignored my texts all week until suddenly needing to see us urgently. My stomach had been churning since noon, though I'd blamed it on excitement. The doorbell rang at 7 sharp. Trevor stood on the porch in his rumpled business casual, Rachel beside him clutching a bottle of wine like a shield. She'd lost weight since their wedding 2 years ago, her cheekbones sharper, her smile more brittle. They'd been struggling financially, I knew, because Trevor had stopped mentioning his job at the marketing firm, and Rachel's photography business had never quite taken off the way she had hoped. "Hi, Mom," Trevor said, wrapping me in a hug that felt performative, the kind you give when you need something but haven't asked yet. Rachel air-kissed my cheek, leaving a trace of vanilla perfume. "The house smells incredible, Mrs. Thornton, just like I remember from college." That should have been my second warning. Rachel had only been to our house 3 times during their 4-year relationship and never for a full meal. She usually claimed dietary restrictions or prior commitments. Tonight, she was practically glowing with enthusiasm. David shook Trevor's hand, that firm grip fathers use when they're trying to read their son's intentions. "How's the new apartment treating you?" he asked. Trevor and Rachel exchanged a look. Quick, loaded, the kind married couples share when they've rehearsed a conversation. "Actually, Dad, that's part of what we wanted to talk about tonight." We settled into the dining room, David at the head of the table, me across from him, Trevor and Rachel on either side. The chandelier cast warm light over the pot roast, and for a moment, it felt like the family dinners from when Trevor was still living at home, back when Sunday meals were routine instead of negotiations. "This is beautiful, Rebecca," Rachel said, serving herself a modest portion. "You're such an amazing homemaker. I've always admired how you make everything look so effortless." The compliments felt sticky, too sweet, like frosting on a cake you didn't order. David poured wine while I tried to shake off the feeling that we were being softened up for something. Trevor cleared his throat halfway through the main course. "So, we have some news." He reached over and squeezed Rachel's hand. "We've been doing a lot of thinking about our future, about what really matters." "That's wonderful," David said, cutting into his roast. "Growth is important in a marriage." "Exactly," Rachel leaned forward, eyes bright. "And we've realized that this whole independence thing, living paycheck to paycheck, never seeing family, it's not sustainable. We want to build something real, something meaningful." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. There was a script here, a carefully planned presentation. I could feel it building like pressure in my ears before a storm. Trevor took a deep breath. We've been looking at our options, and honestly, the rent market is insane right now. Our lease is up next month, and they want to raise it by $400 for that tiny one-bedroom place with the broken dishwasher. The housing market is brutal, David agreed, though I caught the slight tension in his voice. He'd heard this tone from Trevor before, the preamble to a request.
Right. So we started thinking about alternatives. Rachel's smile widened. And then it hit us. Why are we struggling to afford some cramped apartment when there's all this space here? This beautiful house with the guest room just sitting empty most of the time. The words hung in the air like smoke. David's wineglass stopped midway to his lips. Trevor jumped in quickly. We'd contribute, of course, help with groceries, utilities, maybe tackle some of those home improvement projects you've been putting off, Dad. It would be like the old days, but better because now I'm an adult who can actually help around the house. I set my fork down carefully, the way you handle something fragile that might shatter if you're not gentle. Are you asking to move back home? Not asking, Rachel said, her enthusiasm bubbling over. We've already given our landlord 30 days' notice. We thought this would be such a relief for everyone. You get your son back, we get stability, and David gets help with all those weekend projects. The presumption hit me like cold water. Not a request, an announcement. They'd already made the decision and were simply informing us of their plans. David leaned back in his chair, and I recognized the look he got when clients tried to steamroll him in negotiations. You gave notice without discussing this with us first? Trevor's confidence wavered for the first time. Well, we knew you'd say yes. I mean, this is my childhood home. Family helps family, right? And honestly, Mom, you've seemed kind of lonely since I moved out. This could be good for everyone. Rachel nodded eagerly. Plus, I could help you redecorate. Some of these rooms haven't been updated since the 90s. We could make this place really shine. Something cold settled in my chest. The casual dismissal of our home as outdated, the assumption that we'd welcome major changes, the complete lack of respect for our autonomy as adults with our own lives and plans. I stood up slowly, walking to the window that overlooked our back garden. The rose bushes I'd planted 15 years ago were bare now, preparing for winter. In the spring, someone else would tend them. Or maybe they'd rip them out entirely. Mom? Trevor's voice carried a note of uncertainty. You're being quiet. Is everything okay? I turned back to the table, where three faces watched me with varying degrees of expectation. Trevor looked nervous now, finally reading the room. Rachel maintained her bright smile, though it was starting to crack at the edges. David sat perfectly still, waiting to follow my lead. I'm just trying to figure out how to tell you that your plan is impossible. Impossible how? Rachel's voice sharpened. I mean, we're not asking you to support us financially. We just need a place to land while we save for a down payment. Trevor nodded quickly. Right, it's temporary. Maybe a year, 18 months at most. Just until we get back on our feet. I looked at David, who gave me the smallest nod. Permission, support, the green light to say what needed to be said. Because I signed the final papers yesterday morning. This house sold to the Patel family from Brookfield. They take possession December 1st. The silence that followed was so complete. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, even the soft whistle of wind through the window frame. Rachel's smile vanished entirely. What do you mean sold? I mean, we accepted an offer 3 weeks ago, completed the inspection last Monday, and finalized everything at the title company yesterday at 10 in the morning. I picked up my wine glass, surprised by how steady my hand was. We're moving to the cottage in Seaside Pines the week after Thanksgiving. The storm that followed my announcement could have powered the whole neighborhood. Rachel's face went from confusion to horror to rage in about 3 seconds flat. Trevor slammed his palm on the cable so hard the wine glasses jumped. "You can't be serious," he said. "You sold our house without telling us?" "Our house?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. David's eyebrows shot up. Even I was surprised by the edge in my voice.
Rachel stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood. "This is insane, Rebecca. We've been talking about this move for months. We told you we were struggling with rent." "You told me you were having trouble," I said, keeping my voice level. "You didn't tell me you expected me to solve it by becoming your landlord." Trevor ran his hands through his hair, a gesture he'd inherited from his father. "But where are we supposed to go? The rental market is impossible. Everything decent is $2,000 a month minimum." I watched my son pace the length of our dining room, the same room where he'd once built blanket forts and practiced piano recitals. When had he stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as his safety net? "The same place millions of other adults go," David said quietly. "You figure it out. You make sacrifices. You downsize. You get roommates." Rachel whirled on him. "Easy for you to say. You bought this house when it cost $60,000. Do you have any idea what homes cost now?" "Do you have any idea what this house is worth now?" I countered. "Or what David and I sacrificed to keep it all these years?" The room went quiet, except for the rain picking up outside. I stood and walked to the kitchen, not because I needed anything, but because I needed space to think. Through the pass-through window, I could see them huddled together, whispering urgently. That's when David appeared beside me, voice low. "There's something else, isn't there? Something you haven't told them?" I nodded, gripping the edge of the granite countertop. "The cottage in Seaside Pines isn't some retirement whim, David. Dr. Morrison called last Tuesday." His face went pale. "The tests? Stage 2, treatable, but the treatments are going to be expensive, really expensive." I glanced toward the dining room where Trevor and Rachel were still whispering. "The house sale isn't about downsizing for fun. It's about paying for me to live." David's hand found mine, warm and steady. "Why didn't you tell me the results came in?" "Because I needed to process it first, and because I knew once we told the kids, everything would change. They'd either treat me like I'm dying, or they'd start calculating inheritance math." Through the window, I watched Rachel pull out her phone, probably checking rental listings or calling her sister to complain. Trevor was gesturing wildly, his face flushed with frustration. "They don't know about the diagnosis," David said. It wasn't a question. "No, and based on tonight's performance, I'm not sure they deserve to." That was harsh, but I meant it. For months, I had been wrestling with when and how to tell the kids about the cancer. I'd imagined tearful conversations, offers to help, maybe Trevor taking some time off work to drive me to appointments. Instead, they'd shown up to my house demanding space without offering support. David squeezed my hand. "What do you want to do?" Before I could answer, Rachel appeared in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed. "We need to discuss this like adults. This decision affects all of us." "No," I said, turning to face her fully. "This decision affects David and me. You're adults with your own lives. What we do with our property isn't your concern." Her mouth dropped open. "Not our concern. Trevor grew up here. This house is part of his history, his identity. You can't just erase that." Something snapped inside me, clean and sharp. "His identity isn't tied to my real estate portfolio, Rachel. If it is, that's a bigger problem than where you're going to live." Trevor walked in behind his wife, face red with frustration. "Mom, this is really selfish. We're family. Family helps each other out." "Family asks before assuming," David said, stepping closer to me. "Family doesn't show up with moving plans already made." "We didn't think we needed to ask permission to come home," Trevor shot back. "This stopped being your home when you moved out 6 years ago. It became our home, mine and your father's, and we get to decide what happens to it." Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but they felt calculated, performed. "I can't believe you're choosing money over family. I'm choosing my marriage and my future over your convenience. There's a difference." Trevor slumped against the kitchen island, deflated. "So what are we supposed to do now? Our lease ends in 3 weeks. For the first time since they'd arrived, I felt a flicker of sympathy, but it was overwhelmed by something else. a fierce protectiveness of the life David and I had built, the plans we'd made, the future we deserved to choose for ourselves. "You're supposed to be adults," I said. "You figure it out. You ask friends. You extend your lease. You find a different place. You do what every other couple does when their housing situation changes. But we can't afford." "Then you can't afford to live beyond your means. That's not our problem to solve." Rachel wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "This is so cold, Rebecca. I thought you cared about us." "I do care about you, and I meant it. But caring doesn't mean enabling, and enabling doesn't mean love." The kitchen fell silent except for the refrigerator cycling on. Outside, the rain had intensified, drumming against the windows like it was trying to get in. Trevor looked between me and David, searching for cracks in our resolve. "What if we paid rent, real rent, market rate?" I almost laughed. "With what money? You just told us you can't afford your current place." "We could figure something out."
Trevor, I said, sitting down on one of the bar stools. 3 weeks ago, you called to borrow $300 for car repairs. Last month, it was your student loan payment. The month before that, Rachel's camera equipment. When exactly did you plan to start paying us market rate rent? His face flushed deeper. That's different. Those were emergencies. "And this is entitlement," David said flatly. The truth of it hung in the air like a challenge. I watched my son and daughter-in-law absorb the reality that their backup plan had just collapsed, that the safety net they'd assumed would always be there had been carefully folded up and put away. But what they didn't know yet was that the house sale was only the beginning. Tomorrow, they'd learn about the cottage, about the diagnosis, about the future we'd chosen without consulting anyone. And they'd discover that sometimes the people you take for granted are the ones who've been planning the longest. Trevor and Rachel left that night without touching the apple crisp, slamming the front door hard enough to rattle the windows. David and I stood in the sudden quiet of our dining room, surrounded by half-empty plates and the lingering tension of unfinished arguments. "Well," David said, reaching for his wine glass, "that went better than expected." I stared at him. Better? They showed their true colors before we made any compromises. Now we know exactly who we're dealing with. The next morning, my phone buzzed before my coffee finished brewing. Text from Trevor. "We need to talk. This affects more than just you and Dad." Then another from Rachel. "Please reconsider. We're desperate." I deleted both without responding. David found me on the back porch 20 minutes later, wrapped in my terry cloth robe, watching the neighbors load their recycling bins. Normal Tuesday morning activities. The kind of routine I'd be leaving behind in 6 weeks. "No second thoughts?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me. "About the house? None. About the kids? I keep wondering if we raised him to be this entitled, or if life just taught him to expect everything to work out." David's phone chimed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. Text from Rachel. She's asking if we'd consider a rent-to-own arrangement. Persistent. Delusional. He set the phone face down. "Rebecca, there's something I need to tell you about yesterday's closing." I turned to study his face. After 3 decades of marriage, I could read every micro-expression. This one was complicated. Part relief, part worry, all determination. "What happened?" The Patels asked why we were selling. Standard small talk, you know. But when I mentioned downsizing for health reasons, Mrs. Patel got very quiet. Turns out she's an oncology nurse at Portland General. My stomach tightened. "You told them about the diagnosis?" "Not directly, but she put it together, and then she said something that's been bothering me ever since." David leaned forward. "She asked if we had adult children who were supportive during treatment. When I hesitated, she said families often show their true nature when medical bills start piling up." A chill ran down my spine despite the morning warmth. What does that mean? It means she's seen this before. Adult children who suddenly develop financial emergencies when parents get sick, who start making claims on property and assets before the funeral flowers are even ordered. I thought about Trevor's string of emergencies over the past year. The car repair, the student loan, the credit card debt, Rachel's constant hints about wanting to start a family but needing more space, more stability, more help.
The timing felt different now, more calculated. You think they know about the cancer? David was quiet for a long moment. I think Trevor's been getting our mail. What? Last month, when he borrowed the car, I found a medical bill in the glove compartment, folded up, stuffed behind the registration. When I asked him about it, he said it must have fallen out of your purse. My hand started shaking. But I never put medical bills in the car. Exactly. And yesterday, when I went to file the closing documents, I noticed the home office looked different, like someone had been through the desk drawers. I stood up so fast the chair rocked. The key! I gave Trevor the spare key last Christmas in case of emergencies. We walked back into the house together, straight to David's office. The oak desk that had belonged to his father sat in the corner, usually organized to military precision. But now I saw what David meant. Paper stacked differently. The pen holder turned sideways. The desk calendar moved 2 inches from its usual spot. David opened the bottom drawer where he kept important documents. The medical files are still here, but they're not in the right order. He pulled out a folder marked health insurance. Inside, papers shuffled like cards in the wrong sequence. Someone's been reading our private medical information, I whispered. More than reading. Photographing. David pointed to barely visible indentations on the desk blotter. See these marks? Someone pressed hard while writing, like they were copying down account numbers or procedure codes. I sank into the desk chair, mind racing. How long do you think this has been going on? Probably since the first biopsy results came back. Remember when Trevor started calling more often, dropping by to check on us, always asking how we were feeling, if we needed anything?
The pattern crystallized with horrifying clarity. Trevor's increased attention hadn't been concern. It had been reconnaissance. Every casual question about our retirement accounts, our insurance coverage, our estate planning, every offer to help organize papers or run errands. He's been gathering information, I said, building a case for why they deserve to inherit this house. David pulled out his laptop and opened our bank account. Look at this. He pointed to the screen. 3 weeks ago, someone tried to access our online banking, failed password attempts from an IP address that isn't ours. Can you trace it? Already did. It's Trevor's apartment complex. I felt something shift inside me, like tectonic plates rearranging. The son I'd raised, the boy who used to leave me dandelions on Mother's Day, had been systematically invading our privacy while pretending to care about our well-being. There's more, David said quietly. I hired a private investigator last week. I stared at him. You what? Something felt off about Trevor's sudden financial problems. The timing, the frequency, the way he always knew exactly how much to ask for. David opened another file on his laptop. Turns out Trevor and Rachel haven't been struggling the way they claimed. The screen filled with bank statements, credit reports, employment records. Trevor's marketing firm hadn't laid him off. He'd been promoted to senior account manager 6 months ago. Rachel's photography business was thriving, booked solid through the holidays. They've been lying about their finances? Completely. They're making good money. The apartment they're claiming is too expensive. They could afford it easily. They just don't want to. I scrolled through the documents, each page revealing another layer of deception. Joint savings account with over $15,000, 2 car payments that were current, not behind, a vacation to Cabo charged to a credit card 3 weeks ago. Why would they lie about being broke? David's jaw tightened. Because broke adult children get sympathy and financial help. Successful adult children who still want their parents to subsidize their lifestyle just look greedy. My phone buzzed on the desk. Text from Trevor. Mom, can we meet tomorrow? Just the 2 of us. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I showed David the message. He shook his head. He's panicking, realizes he overplayed his hand. What do you mean? Think about it. If they'd approached this differently, asked nicely, offered fair rent, shown genuine respect for our decision-making, we might have considered helping them transition to a new place. But they didn't ask. They announced. They assumed. They treated us like we owe them our home. Another text from Rachel. Rebecca, I'm sorry if we seemed presumptuous. We're just scared about the housing market. Can we start over? I turned my phone face down. Too little, too late. David closed the laptop and looked at me seriously. There's something else the investigator found. Trevor and Rachel have been looking at houses in Millbrook Heights for months. Not rentals. Houses to buy. But they said they can't afford the houses they want. 4-bedroom colonials, updated kitchens, 2-car garages, properties in the $300,000 to $400,000 range. He paused. They've been assuming they'd inherit this house and use it as collateral for a bigger mortgage. The pieces clicked together with awful clarity. The sudden interest in our finances, the questions about estate planning, the assumption that our home would naturally become their launching pad. They hadn't been planning to move in temporarily, they'd been planning to take over. They've been treating us like a real estate investment, I said. Worse, they've been treating us like an obstacle between them and what they think they deserve. I walked to the window overlooking our backyard. The garden David and I had planted together, the fruit trees we'd nursed through drought years, the deck where we'd hosted countless barbecues. In 6 weeks, the Patels would stand in the same spot, planning their own life in our space. But that felt right. They'd earned it by making an offer, going through the proper channels, respecting our autonomy. Unlike our son who tried to claim it through birthright and manipulation. My phone rang. Trevor's name on the screen. Answer it, David said, but put it on speaker. I swiped to accept the call. Hi, Trevor. Your mom. I've been thinking about last night. I know we came on too strong, but you have to understand our position. The rental market is brutal. We're not trying to take advantage. We just need help. I caught David's eye. He nodded slightly. Trevor, I need to ask you something directly, and I want an honest answer. Of course. Have you been going through our personal papers? What kind of question is that? The kind that deserves a yes or no answer. More silence. Then quietly, I was worried about you, both of you. You've seemed different lately, distracted. I thought maybe there were problems you weren't telling me about. So you violated our privacy instead of asking? I just wanted to make sure you were okay financially, that you weren't being pressured into selling by medical bills or something. The admission hung between us like a confession. He knew about the diagnosis, knew about the medical expenses, knew about everything and still shown up demanding to move in without offering to help with what we were actually facing.
Trevor, I said, my voice deadly calm, how long have you known about my cancer? The line went so quiet I thought he'd hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was small, ashamed. Since the biopsy results came back? David's face went granite hard. I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. And instead of asking how you could help, I said, you decided the best solution was to move into our house and make your housing crisis our responsibility? Mom, it's not like that. It's exactly like that, Trevor. You've known for weeks that we're facing cancer treatment costs, and your response was to increase our expenses by moving in, not to offer help, not to ask what we needed, to take more. I could hear Rachel in the background hissing something urgent. Look, Trevor said, we can talk about helping with medical stuff later. Right now, we need to focus on the housing situation. You can't just leave us homeless. And there it was, the complete absence of empathy, the total inversion of priorities. His mother had cancer, and he was worried about his apartment lease. Trevor, I said, and my voice came out stronger than I'd ever heard it. You're not homeless. You're adults who made poor decisions, and I'm not your backup plan anymore. I hung up and immediately blocked both their numbers. David wrapped his arms around me from behind. How do you feel? I leaned into him, solid and warm and choosing me over convenience, like I'd just learned the difference between being a mother and being a doormat.
The real confrontation was still coming, because tomorrow, Trevor and Rachel would discover something that would change everything, again. 3 days later, I was folding towels in the laundry room when the doorbell rang. Through the frosted glass, I could see two familiar silhouettes, Trevor and Rachel, back for round 2. David answered before I could stop him. "We're not changing our minds," he said through the barely cracked door. "Dad, please, just 5 minutes." Trevor's voice carried a desperation I'd never heard before. "We found out some things about Mom's condition. We want to help." I appeared behind David, curiosity overriding my irritation. "What things?" Rachel stepped forward, mascara perfect, hair salon fresh. "We know about the cancer, Rebecca. We know about the treatment costs. That's why we're here." "To offer support?" David's tone suggested he doubted it. "To offer a solution," Trevor said quickly. "We've been researching experimental treatments, clinical trials, alternative financing options. We want to be part of your care team." I almost laughed. "Your solution involves moving into our house, doesn't it?" Rachel's practiced sympathy cracked slightly. "Well, yes, but not the way you think. We've restructured our finances. We can pay you $2,000 a month in rent, help with medical appointments, coordinate care schedules. You'd have live-in support during treatment. And in exchange?" Trevor glanced at Rachel, then back at me. "We'd like to discuss inheritance planning, making sure the house stays in the family long term." There it was. The real agenda, wrapped in fake concern and dressed up as caregiving. David stepped back to let them into the entryway, but no further. "Inheritance planning for someone who just started treatment? That's morbid, even for you." "It's practical," Rachel insisted. "Medical bankruptcies happen all the time. We're trying to protect family assets." I studied my daughter-in-law's face, noting the calculation behind her sympathetic expression. "Protect them from what?" "From being liquidated to pay for treatments that might not even work," Trevor said. "Dad, you know how the system works. They'll take everything before insurance kicks in properly." "They?" David's voice dropped dangerously low. "The industry, hospitals, pharmaceutical companies. They drain families dry and then move on to the next patient." I felt something crystallize inside me, sharp and unforgiving. "So your solution is to drain us first." "That's not what we're saying," Rachel protested. "We're saying we should consolidate resources, pool our money, share expenses, protect what matters most." "What matters most to you," I corrected, "which is this house." Trevor's facade finally slipped. "Mom, be realistic. Cancer treatment could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Even with insurance, you're looking at bankruptcy. At least if we're living here, paying rent, the house stays viable. Otherwise, you'll lose everything anyway." "Everything?" I repeated slowly. "Or just the things you want to inherit?" The silence stretched until David broke it. "Rebecca, should we show them?" I nodded. We'd prepared for this moment, planned for their inevitable return with new tactics and false concern. David disappeared into his office and returned with a manila folder. "Since you're so worried about our financial situation, you should probably see our actual medical coverage." Trevor opened the folder cautiously. His face went pale as he read. "Supplemental cancer insurance? When did you get this?" 2 years ago, I said, before we even knew I was sick. "Turns out your father and I are better at planning than you assumed." Rachel leaned over to read. "Full treatment coverage, experimental therapy allowance, travel and lodging for out-of-state facilities." Her voice got smaller with each item. "This covers everything."
Plus, the house sale gives us complete financial freedom, David added. "No mortgage, no debt, and a cottage that's already paid off. We're not going bankrupt, Trevor. We're simplifying." Trevor looked up from the papers, confusion replacing calculation. "But then why didn't you tell us about the insurance? Why let us think you were in financial trouble?" "Because we weren't in financial trouble," I said. "You assumed we were because it fit your narrative. You needed us to be vulnerable so you could position yourselves as saviors." Rachel's composure finally cracked.
This is unbelievable. We were trying to help. No, David said firmly. You were trying to help yourselves to our house. There's a difference. I walked to the hall closet and pulled out a cardboard box I'd prepared the night before. Inside were copies of every document David's investigator had gathered, plus some additional items that had taken me 30 years to accumulate. Since you're so interested in our financial planning, I said, setting the box on the coffee table, you should see how we really spend our money. Trevor reached for the first folder, bank statements going back 5 years, highlighting every loan we'd given him, every emergency we'd covered, every temporary help that had never been repaid. The running total was written in red ink at the bottom of the last page, $23,847. $24,000, I said as he stared at the number. That's what your emergencies have cost us. Car repairs, student loans, credit card debt, security deposits, medical bills for Rachel's root canal, the wedding photographer when your original one canceled. Rachel grabbed the folder from Trevor's hands. We never asked you to keep track like this. You never asked us anything. You just took and assumed we'd keep giving. David pulled out another folder. And here's what you've contributed to our household over the same period. He opened it to reveal a single page, empty except for a date from 2 Christmases ago, and an entry, Trevor and Rachel, bottle of wine, $12.99. The number looked absurd sitting alone on the page, but that was the point. Trevor's face flushed red. That's not fair. We've helped in other ways. Name one. We visited. We called to check on you. You called to gather information, I corrected, and you visited to case the house, measuring rooms, commenting on renovations, making lists of what you'd change when you took over. Rachel stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. We're family. Families don't keep score like this. You're right, I said, closing the folders. Families don't keep score, but landlords do. Creditors do. And that's what you turned me into without asking. Trevor tried one last approach, his voice shifting to the little boy tone that used to melt my heart. Mom, I know we messed up, but we can fix this. We can start paying you back, help with medical appointments, be the family you deserve. Trevor, I said, and my voice came out gentler than I felt. Trevor, you had 30 years to be the family I deserved. You don't get to start now because it's convenient for your housing situation. David stepped forward. The house closes in 4 weeks. The cottage is ready for us to move in. Our medical team is assembled. Our financial planning is complete. Your mother and I are moving forward with our lives. Without us, Rachel whispered. Without your demands on us, I clarified. If you want a relationship with me, it starts with respecting my choices, not trying to override them. Trevor looked around the living room one last time, taking in the family photos, the furniture he'd assumed would someday be his, the space he'd thought he could reclaim by showing up with the right combination of pressure and guilt. So that's it? You're just gonna cut us off? We're going to live our lives, David said. You're welcome to build a relationship with us on adult terms, but you're not welcome to treat us like your backup plan. After they left, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the walls golden. The house felt different now, not like something I was losing, but like something I was finally free to leave behind. David found me there an hour later. Any regrets? I thought about Trevor learning to ride his bike in our driveway, about Rachel's genuine laugh at their wedding, about all the holidays and birthdays and ordinary Tuesdays that had happened in these rooms. Then I thought about the cottage by the ocean, about chemotherapy sessions without the stress of managing other people's expectations, about David and I growing old together without adult children treating us like a retirement plan. None, I said. This was never about the house. It was about boundaries. 6 weeks later, David and I were unpacking boxes in our new cottage while Trevor and Rachel figured out their own housing situation. They'd found a rental they could afford. They always could have afforded it. They just hadn't wanted to. I started chemotherapy on Tuesday morning in December. David drove me to Portland General, held my hand during the IV insertion, brought crossword puzzles and homemade soup. My phone buzzed once with a text from Trevor. Thinking of you today. I didn't respond, but I didn't delete it either. Some boundaries are walls, others are bridges you're not ready to cross yet.
The cottage has a garden that backs up to the Nail and Bay. On clear days, I can see fishing boats heading out to sea. The Patels sent a photo last month. They'd planted tulips where my roses used to bloom. Their children were building a snowman in the front yard. It looked like home, just not my home anymore. Have you ever had to choose between being a good parent and being a respected adult? Have you ever discovered that the people demanding your sacrifice weren't actually family? They were just relatives with expectations. Tell me your story in the comments below. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be taken for granted. And remember, your life belongs to you first. Everyone else gets what you choose to give, not what they decide to take. 2 more compelling stories are just a click away. If this one drew you in, wait until you see what else we found. Ready to explore?